My name is Ashley Coleman, and I am 37 years old. Until recently, I thought I understood my place in this world. I thought I knew the meaning of home, of family, of safety. I thought that love, when it was strong enough, could silence doubt and soften even the harshest of hearts. I was wrong. I am telling you this story because yesterday I buried my husband, Marcus Coleman, the kindest man I have ever known. And today I am standing in the doorway of the Victorian house we shared, wearing the same black dress I wore to his funeral, as his family tries to throw me out of the very life Marcus and I built together. But before I tell you about the betrayal, you need to know about Marcus, about us, about the love that shaped my life in ways his family never could understand. Marcus was a veterinarian in Richmond, Virginia, a man who spent his days healing broken wings, mending battered paws, and soothing frightened animals. His heart was the kind that left space for everyone: neighbors, strangers, patients, and especially me. I met him when I was still working long shifts as a nurse. One night, exhausted after back-to-back emergencies, I stumbled into a coffee shop. He was sitting at a corner table reading a veterinary journal with his hair falling slightly into his eyes. When he looked up, he smiled at me like he had known me all his life. That smile, steady, patient, and so full of warmth, became my anchor. Within a year, we were inseparable. We built a rhythm together. I cooked while he told me about a stray cat he had rescued. He mowed the lawn while I planted herbs in the garden. We spent evenings curled on the old Victorian porch, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the trees. When we married, Marcus insisted we stay in the Coleman family home, a sprawling Victorian passed down for 3 generations. "It's not just a house, Ash," he said as we stood in front of it, its windows glowing with soft light. "It's where our story will grow." And for 8 years it did, but Marcus' family never saw me as part of that story. From the beginning, they treated me like an intruder who had wandered into sacred territory. His father, Raymond, was blunt about it. "This house, this land, it stays in the bloodline," he told me before our wedding. His voice carried the weight of an old rulebook no one else had signed. His mother, Patricia, was more subtle, but her words stung sharper. At our first family dinner, she studied me across the table and said, "She's very practical, isn't she?" As though practicality were a disease. The cousins whispered when I entered rooms, conversations always shifting as if I had interrupted secrets. I tried, for Marcus' sake, to ignore it. I laughed politely when Patricia compared me to the daughters of her friends, women from good families, who apparently would have been better matches for her son. I stayed silent when Raymond grilled Marcus about prenuptial agreements, and I smiled through every holiday meal where I was seated at the far end of the table, away from the real family. 8 years of this. 8 years of being tolerated, never welcomed. What Raymond and Patricia never understood was that Marcus saw everything. He saw the way I bit my tongue when their words bruised. He heard the silences that followed my footsteps into a room. He knew the loneliness that clung to me, even in a house filled with his relatives, and he hated it. One night, months before his illness, he sat me down at our kitchen table. His eyes were serious, more serious than I had ever seen them. "Ashley," he said, "my family has convinced themselves that when I die, this house, this practice, everything I've worked for will return to them. They've been planning for your departure since the day we married, but they don't know the truth." From a folder he pulled out carefully prepared documents. Deeds, wills, legal clauses with language I barely understood. "Everything is in our joint names," he explained. "The house, the practice, the accounts, and I've written a will that leaves everything to you, with a no-contest clause. If they fight it, they get nothing." I stared at him, stunned. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me sooner?" His expression softened, and he reached across the table for my hand. "Because I hoped it would never come to this. I wanted to believe my family would change, but I won't leave you unprotected, Ashley. Not now, not ever." He had written a letter too, one addressed to his family. It began with the words, "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to protect Ashley from your cruelty." Tears blurred my vision as I realized the depth of his love, not just in life, but in preparing for a world without him. 6 weeks later, Marcus was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We had thought his discomfort was just indigestion, maybe exhaustion from too many late-night emergency calls, but the doctor's quiet tone told us otherwise. 6 months, maybe 8, she said gently. Marcus squeezed my hand. Then we'll make every day count, he whispered to me as we walked out of the hospital, and we did. We filled the days with laughter, small adventures, quiet evenings on the porch. He wrote me letters, dozens of them, each beginning with "My dearest Ashley," and ending with promises that his love would outlive him. He told me to frame the garden we had planted together as proof that beauty grows from care. He reminded me that kindness was my greatest strength. When the pain grew too sharp, he would hold my hand and whisper, "Don't let them break you. You are stronger than they'll ever know." On a golden October morning, sunlight streaming through our bedroom window, Marcus took his final breath in my arms. I whispered my love into his ear as he slipped peacefully away. The Coleman family took over the funeral as if I were nothing more than a guest. Patricia decided on the hymns, Raymond handled the reception, and I was told, without hesitation, that I would sit in the second row. Family sits in the front, Patricia said briskly, as though my marriage certificate were a piece of scrap paper. I swallowed my anger, choosing silence. I knew Marcus' documents would speak louder than any protest I could make. At the cemetery, as the earth closed over the man who had been my world, Raymond pulled me aside. His eyes were cold, his voice sharp. "We'll give you a few days to grieve, Ashley," he said, "but then you'll need to pack your things. This property reverts to blood family now. Always has, always will." For a moment the world tilted. My breath caught in my chest, but then I remembered Marcus' steady hands, his whispered words, the folder of legal protections he had left me. I straightened my shoulders and met Raymond's gaze. He thought he was evicting a widow with no fight left in her. What he didn't realize was that Marcus had already armed me with everything I needed. I would not leave quietly. The day after the funeral, the house felt different. The warmth Marcus and I had built within its walls seemed to have been stripped away, replaced by a chill that wasn't just from October's bite. It was the Colemans, his family, moving like vultures around me, as though Marcus' grave were simply a milestone they had long been waiting for. I woke early, still wearing grief like a second skin, and walked into the hallway to find strangers at my door. Not strangers exactly, his cousins, his brothers, but strangers to me nonetheless. Gerald and Timothy, Raymond's sons, had arrived with tools, as if they were contractors sent to demolish something instead of family who should have been grieving. "We'll start with the locks," Gerald announced. His voice was clipped, businesslike, as though he were reading off a checklist. "Dad doesn't want any. Confusion about who lives here now." I stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. "Locks," I managed, my voice thin. "Standard procedure," Timothy said with a smirk. "You'll have time to get your things, but Gerald's family will be moving in by the weekend." The words hit me like cold steel. My home, the walls where Marcus and I had laughed, loved, argued, and dreamed, reduced to a schedule for their convenience. I felt the sting of tears, but Marcus' voice echoed in my mind. "Don't let them intimidate you. I didn't fight them then. I didn't scream or throw myself in their way as they pulled tools from their truck and started fiddling with the doorknobs. I simply stood still, hands trembling at my sides, breathing through the rage and grief that threatened to consume me, because I knew something they didn't. I knew about the will. I knew about the joint ownership, the no contest clause, the way Marcus had written his love into law. And I knew that the louder they shouted, the more foolish they would look when the truth finally came crashing down. I let my mind drift back to that night in our kitchen, the night Marcus had shown me the documents. The memory played in my mind as clearly as if I was sitting there again. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of chamomile tea, the way his hand shook just slightly as he slid the folder across the table. "Read it, Ash," he'd urged gently. Page by page, I had tried to understand. Property deeds, bank accounts, his practice, all of it signed into both our names, and then the will. At the top, his familiar handwriting in a note to me: "If they come for you, know that I saw this coming, and know that I have already beaten them for you." Tears had fallen silently onto the papers that night. I remembered gripping his hand, begging him not to speak, as if he were already gone. But Marcus had only smiled, weary but resolute. "They think love is measured in bloodlines, but love is what we build, Ashley, what we protect. This house is yours as much as it ever was mine. Back in the present, Gerald and Timothy worked quickly, almost gleefully. Gerald barked orders about where furniture should be moved. Timothy wandered into the living room, wrinkling his nose at the photographs of Marcus and me. "Half this stuff should be tossed," he muttered. "Gerald's wife has better taste anyway." My hands tightened into fists, but I kept my voice steady. "Those are Marcus things, you don't touch them." Timothy raised his eyebrows. "You really think you get a say?" They laughed between themselves, certain I was powerless, certain that their father's word was law. Their arrogance was almost blinding. They didn't see the calm in me, the way my silence wasn't surrender but preparation. They thought I was broken. They thought I would leave quietly. They had no idea. That evening, after they finally left, I sat at Marcus' old desk, pulled out the business card he had made me promise to keep, and dialed the number. "Charles Peyton," came the deep, steady voice of Marcus' lawyer. "This is Ashley," I said, my voice breaking for the first time that day. "Marcus' wife." There was a pause, then a softness in his tone. "Ashley, he told me you'd call. Are they pressuring you already?" I swallowed hard. "They've changed the locks. They said Gerald's family will move in by the weekend." Charles sighed, not in surprise but in recognition. He knew this would happen. "Ashley, everything is in place. Legally, you are untouchable. The house, the practice, the assets, they're all yours. Raymond and his sons don't have a claim, not a shred." For the first time since the funeral, I exhaled without feeling pain in my chest. "So, I don't have to leave. You don't move an inch," Charles said firmly. "If they threaten you again, let me know. The law is on your side." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "Marcus really thought of everything, didn't he?" Charles' voice softened again. "He loved you. This was his way of making sure you'd never face them alone." The next morning, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, Raymond Coleman stood there, broad-shouldered, eyes like ice. "Keys," he barked. "Now, Gerald needs access." I held the door, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "No," I said quietly. His face darkened. "Don't play games, Ashley. You have no right here. This house belongs to my bloodline, not to some nurse Marcus dragged in off the street." For a moment, the words almost knocked me off balance. Almost, but then I thought of Marcus, of his steady voice whispering, "Don't let them intimidate you." So I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and looked Raymond in the eye. "I won't argue with you," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "The law will speak for me." He sneered, stepping closer as though he could crush me with his presence. "The law? You think a few papers will stand against me." But for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I simply closed the door in his face, and as the wood shut between us, I whispered into the silence, "Marcus, I'm doing what you asked. I won't let them win." I used to think the hardest part of grief was the silence. The way a room feels empty even when you're standing in it. The way you reach across the bed in the night, forgetting, only to find a cold pillow instead of the warmth you ache for. But grief isn't always silent. Sometimes it roars. Sometimes it comes in the form of lawyers, petitions, and family members who refuse to see reason. That was how the Colemans grieved through war. 2 weeks after Marcus' funeral, a letter arrived from the courthouse. Raymond and his sons had filed a claim challenging Marcus' will. I wasn't surprised. Charles had warned me. "They will try, Ashley. They think you're soft. They think you'll surrender before the fight begins." But Marcus had left me more than papers. He had left me strength. So when the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courthouse with my head high. My black dress was simple, my hands steady, but inside I whispered to Marcus, "I hope I'm making you proud." The Colemans sat across the aisle, Raymond in a dark suit, jaw set like granite. Gerald leaned in to whisper to Timothy, both of them smirking as if victory were already theirs. Patricia wore pearls and carried herself like royalty. They truly believed the world belonged to them. When the judge entered, the room hushed. Charles stood beside me, calm as stone. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a complicated case. The late Dr. Marcus Coleman made every intention clear. The estate is jointly owned with his wife, Ashley Coleman. His will confirms it beyond question. And the no contest clause ensures that any challenge results in forfeiture. Raymond's lawyer stood, papers in hand, insisting I had no rightful claim. He painted me as a gold digger, a temporary guest in a family legacy. My cheeks burned as he spoke, but I didn't bow my head. Not once. Then Charles produced the documents. One by one notarized deeds. Bank accounts with both our names. The will signed and witnessed. And finally Marcus' letter. Charles unfolded it with deliberate care. His voice, steady but firm, carried Marcus' words into the silent courtroom. If you are hearing this, it means I am gone. To my family. I know what you think of Ashley. I know the whispers, the dismissals, the cruelty. I married her with open eyes, with love you could never measure. This house, this practice, this life, it belongs to us both. If you challenge her place, you dishonor me. And if you think she will stand alone, know this. I have already given her everything she needs. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Raymond's face drained of color. Patricia pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Gerald muttered something under his breath, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The judge studied the letter, then looked directly at Raymond. This will is airtight. The joint ownership is unquestionable. Mr. Coleman's wishes are explicit. There is no case here. The gavel struck. The echo filled the room like thunder. And for the first time since Marcus' death, I felt safe. But the reckoning didn't end in the courtroom. Word spread quickly. Richmond was a close-knit town, and the Coleman name carried weight. But so did the truth. Neighbors who had once smiled politely at Patricia now crossed the street to avoid her. At church, whispers followed Raymond down the aisle, voices murmuring about greed and cruelty. Gerald, who had been interviewing for a promotion at his firm, suddenly found his calls unanswered. His supervisor, a man who had attended the same church as Marcus and me, had seen the court documents. If you can't honor family, he told him bluntly, how can you be trusted to honor clients? Patricia's carefully constructed social standing, luncheons, charity committees, garden parties, shattered like glass. Invitations dwindled. Friends excused themselves with false smiles. The family who had once looked down on me was now drowning in the weight of their own arrogance. And yet, I felt no satisfaction in their fall. People expected me to celebrate, to throw their humiliation back at them. But I couldn't. Marcus had never taught me to live with spite. He had taught me to live with dignity. When neighbors asked me, "How could you stand so calm in court?" I answered simply, "Because Marcus wanted me to live with strength, not spite." I held no victory dance in my heart, only quiet relief. The documents weren't just proof of my right, they were proof of his love. That was enough. And I knew what I had to do next. The Victorian house stood quiet when I returned, sunlight spilling through the stained glass windows. Marcus' favorite armchair still sat by the fireplace. His stethoscope still hung by the door. I could have closed it all off, preserved the house like a museum of grief. But that wasn't Marcus' dream. One evening, sitting alone in his study, I found another letter, one he hadn't told me about. "Ash, if you're reading this, I hope you're smiling again. Don't let the house grow silent. Don't let the clinic fade. Fill it with life. Fill it with hope. That's what we worked for." Tears fell, but this time they weren't only from sorrow. They were from resolve. The very next week, I reopened Marcus' veterinary practice. I hired 2 young vets, eager and bright-eyed, who had once trained under Marcus. Together we cleaned, painted, and filled the clinic with the sound of healing again. I turned part of the waiting area into a small community space, a place for local families to gather, for children to read to therapy dogs, for neighbors to share coffee while their pets received care. The house, too, became more than walls of grief. I hosted garden days where friends came to help me tend the herbs Marcus and I had planted. I opened the porch to book clubs, to laughter, to life. And every evening as I locked the doors, I whispered to Marcus, "I kept it alive. Just like you asked." The Colemans had tried to erase me.
They had tried to claim my home, my marriage, my life. But Marcus had given me more than love. He had given me the strength to stand. And in the reckoning, it was not me who was destroyed. It was them. I used to think the hardest part of grief was the silence. It shifts, but it never leaves entirely. Empty, even in the months after the courtroom victory. The way you after the whispers about the Colemans began to fade. I began to realize that survival was not the end of my story. But Marcus hadn't wanted me to simply exist. Sometimes it roars. Sometimes it comes in the form of lawyers, petitions, fearlessly, and family members who refused to see that defined his own life. That was how the Colemans I began to rebuild piece by piece. 2 weeks not after just my home but myself. A letter arrived from the courthouse that once echoed Raymond and his sons had filed a claim challenging Marcus. Not because Marcus had returned, I wasn't surprised, but because I was Charles had brave enough to let life return to it. Ashley. His veterinary clinic, once threatened by greed before the fight became the heart of that rebirth. But Marcus had left me more than two young vets I'd hired. He had left me strength. I expanded its reach. So when the day of the hearing began as a place for pets, I walked into the courthouse with my head high. A wildlife my black dress was simple, my hands birds, abandoned but inside raccoons. I whispered to Marcus, even the occasional lost fawn found safety within its walls. The Colemans sat across the aisle. I could almost hear Marcus laugh whenever a child brought in a box with a trembling animal inside. Gerald leaned in to whisper to Timothy. Every life deserves a chance. Both of them smirking as if victory were already theirs. And that became our motto. Patricia wore pearls and carried herself like royalty. Became a beacon. They truly believed the world just bring their pets for healing. When the judge entered, they came to feel part of something bigger. Charles stood beside me. Compassion had become contagious. Your Honor, and for me, every day I walked through those doors, I felt closer to Marcus. The late Dr. Marcus Coleman made every intention clear. What surprised me most was the community with his wife, the same neighbors who once hesitated to greet me at barbecues. It beyond question. The church ladies who whispered when Patricia dismissed me ensures even that the grocery clerk used to frown when I mentioned the Coleman name. Raymond's lawyer they began to look at me differently. Not as the outsider wife, no rightful claim. Not as the woman who stole. He painted me as a gold digger, but as Ashley, a temporary guest, the woman who had carried on Marcus' legacy. My cheeks burned as he spoke. But I rallied around my head. Volunteers signed up to help us produce the documents. Local schools arranged field trips for children to learn about animals with both our names. Donations came in, signed and witnessed, but from admiration. Marcus' letter. For the first time since marrying into the Coleman with deliberate care. I wasn't merely tolerated. His voice, steady but respected, carried Marcus' words into the silent courtroom. And in the strangest twist of fate, if you are hearing the family who had tried to erase me from Marcus' life to my family. Through their cruelty, I know what you think of Ashley. Place in this community. I know the whispers, the dismissals, even with the laughter of children in the clinic, I married her with neighbors at my side. With love you could never measure. Remained an inward this house, journey. This practice, one this evening, life. After a long day of surgeries and rescues, if you challenge her place, open the door in Marcus' old desk, and if you think she will stand alone, know this. I had read it before. I have already given her everything. But this time I read it slowly. For a moment, every word pressing into my heart. Raymond's face drained of color. If the world ever makes you doubt your worth, pressed a hand to her mouth. Eyes you were my choice every day. Gerald muttered something under his breath, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. For joy, the judge studied the letter. Don't let anyone steal the light we built. This will is airtight, and when you're ready, the joint ownership is unquestionable. That's how I will live on through you. Mr. Coleman's my tears fell freely. But for the first time they weren't heavy. The gavel they were cleansing. The echo filled the room. I framed the letter and placed it in my office since Marcus' death. Patients, friends, and volunteers often paused to read the courtroom. Some wiping their own eyes after reaching the end. Richmond was a closed-knit town. That letter became my compass, and the Coleman name every decision I made, but every challenge I faced. Neighbors who had once smiled politely at Patricia now crossed the street to avoid resilience. At church, that was the life he wanted me to Raymond down the aisle, and I was finally living murmuring about greed as for the Colemans. Gerald did what who had been interviewing for a promotion at his firm. Raymond suddenly found his calls unanswered. His voice no longer booming with supervisor, a man who had attended the same church as Marcus' reputation, had seen the court followed him wherever he went. If you can't honor Patricia's family, pearls lost their shine as invitations to luncheons dwindled. To honor clients? Her name whispered Patricia's not carefully constructed but social standing. Gerald and Timothy, charity committees, so certain of their parties, found themselves fractured. Invitations had cost them opportunities. Friends excused themselves with false smiles, and even each other's trust. The family who had once looked down on me was now drowning by bloodline, had lost the one thing they valued most. And yet, I felt no satisfaction in their fall. They faded into the background of Richmond society. People expected me to celebrate, a cautionary tale whispered at gatherings. But I
Meanwhile,
couldn't.
Marcus
Once the
had never
outsider
taught
they
me
had
to
scorned
live with spite,
stood at the center
he
of
had
a
taught me
thriving
to live with
community.
dignity.
Greed had
When
crossed
neighbors
and
asked
everything.
me,
How
"Love
could you
had given
stand
me
so
more than
calm
I
in
ever
court?"
imagined,"
I answered
now,
simply,
as I sit on the porch of
because
the
Marcus
Victorian home
wanted me to
Marcus
live
and I
with
once
strength,
dreamed about,
not spite.
the garden
I held
blooming with
no
colors
victory
we planted
dance
together.
in my heart.
I realize
Only
I am not
quiet
the same
relief.
woman I was when
The
he left this
documents
world.
weren't just proof of my
Stronger,
right.
They
Not
were
because
proof
I
of
wanted
his
to be,
love,
but because
that
I
was
had
enough.
to be.
And
I
because
knew what I had
Marcus
to do
believed
next.
I could be.
The
So
Victorian
if you're
house
listening to
stood
my
quiet
story,
when I returned,
wondering how to endure
sunlight
when the world
spilling
tries
through
to
the
strip
stained
away
glass
your worth,
windows,
let me leave
Marcus'
you with a
favorite
lesson my life
armchair
has
still
taught me.
sat by the
Family
fireplace.
isn't blood.
His stethoscope
Family is
still
who
hung
stands
by the
beside
door.
you,
I
protects
could have
you,
closed
and
it
loves
all
you
off,
unconditionally.
preserved the house
Marcus
like a museum
knew
of
that.
grief.
He lived
But
it every
that
day.
wasn't Marcus'
And
dream.
because of his love,
One evening,
and my
sitting
refusal
alone in
to
his
bow to
study,
cruelty,
I found
I
another
am
letter,
still standing.
one he hadn't
I will
told me
always
about.
carry grief.
Ash, if
But
you're
I also
reading this,
carry his
I hope
legacy,
you're smiling
alive
again.
in every animal
Don't
we
let
heal,
the house grow
every
silent.
neighbor we welcome.
Don't let
Every
the clinic
moment of
fade.
kindness that
Fill
ripples
it with
outward
life
from this home.
Fill it with
This
hope.
house isn't just
That's
mine.
what we worked for.
It's ours,
Tears
Marcus
fell.
and mine.
But this
And
time
everyone
they weren't
who
only
walks
from
through its
sorrow.
doors with hope
They
in
were
their
from
heart.
resolve. And as the,
The very
sun
next
sets
week,
over the garden,
I reopened
I
Marcus'
whisper
veterinary
into the
practice.
golden light. I
I
hired
kept
two
my
young
promise,
vets,
Marcus,
eager and bright-eyed,
I'm still standing,
who had once trained
and
under
I
Marcus.
always will.
Together we cleaned, painted, and filled the clinic with the sound of healing again. I turned part of the waiting area into a small community space, a place for local families to gather, for children to read to therapy dogs, for neighbors to share coffee while their pets received care. The house, too, became more than walls of grief. I hosted garden days where friends came to help me tend the herbs Marcus and I had planted. I opened the porch to book clubs, to laughter, to life. And every evening as I locked the doors, I whispered to Marcus, I kept it alive. Just like you asked. The Colemans had tried to erase me. They had tried to claim my home, my marriage, my life. But Marcus had given me more than love. He had given me the strength to stand. And in the reckoning, it was not me who was destroyed. It was them.